it's Goliaths. So we're in the expectation series, but it's Goliaths. Now last week we talked about that story, a little bit of David and Goliath, but we looked at it from the lens of how God calls us to worship and how we often worship. How God calls us to worship out of that courageous place like David, but oftentimes we worship out of that cowardness of the Israelite army. And as we were going through there, the Holy Spirit was like, yep, now you need to go in greater detail on what that looks like next week. And so if you're looking for a text today, we're not going to use all the verses that we did last week, but we are going to use a piece of them. So we're in 1 Samuel 17, starting with 8 through 11, and then we'll jump to 16. But it reads, I'll just read it. I'll read it if I read it from here. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants, and you shall serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. When we look at this text, in other words, what God is saying, listen, I defy the armies of God. Your God ain't nothing. The God that you represent, which is the same God that you and I represent today, is the one and only true God, and he is totally spitting down the name. He's saying, I disrespect, I defy, and I don't like you or your God. I don't like him in any way, because to me, he's fake. Because look at me, I'm huge. Listen, like, I don't know about you, but I'm on like David's side right here. Like, those are straight up fighting words. Like, I'm not from the suburbs. No disrespect to anybody from the suburbs. But in this place, man, I'm like David. I'm jumping to the front lines. I don't even care. I don't even care about anything else, because I know my God is with me. And if he's with me, whom shall be against me? Right? And so we look at this, and that's what he's saying. He said, hey, give me a man that we may fight together. And it said, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. They were terrified. And I told you last week, in my opinion, this has got to be one of the saddest verses in the entire Bible. Because God's people were scared. He's calling us to operate out of a place of power. He's not calling us to operate out of a place of fear. He is calling us to walk with him, not be scared, even though we have him. If we jump to verse 16, which is up here, it says, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. He came and took his stand and said all of these words, morning and evening. Before we go there, listen. I want you to know that I totally know that some of you are walking through tough circumstances. And some of you know people who are walking through tough circumstances. And I want you to know that I get it. Trust me. God also gets it. If I'm going to speak about my household, and Tat doesn't always like it when I talk about her, but Tat's been walking through constant pain for weeks. Weeks. I'm not talking like 2, 3. I'm talking about like 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 weeks. It's been constant pain in her mouth. And if you've had mouth pain before, you know that it's brutal. Like even a toothache wants to debilitate you sometimes. But like she had like this infection in a couple of her teeth, 2 of her teeth, that worked its way up into the bone. And so last week, she had surgery last Friday. And I love her courage and her strength. But in the grand scheme of things, she had no business singing last week. And sometimes in my mind, like I look at things from like this hardcore lens. And listen, if I got a limp up here with my bone sticking out of my leg, I'm going to preach. And so sometimes I have this unrealistic expectation, and I have to make sure that I keep that to myself and don't push it on anybody else, because that's just how I'm wired. But she's saying 2 days after a surgery. Now, normally people think dentists and like, oh, yeah, they just pulled the tooth. No, they had to put her to sleep. She had to be sedated because it was that bad. And not only, after they sedated her, so she wouldn't feel anything, and she woke up in the middle of the procedure, and it's like, I can feel you scraping, I can feel you poking, and they had to stop. So they didn't even get to finish what they were doing. And she's been grinding it out, and it's been brutal. But you know what? She's still here.
Praise God.
She's still singing. Now, I don't say that to gas her up. Because a lot of us probably went through a ton of stuff, but we're still here, right? We're still here. And so I'm not minimizing what anybody else is going through because I'm supremely confident that some of you are walking through the fire, and I want you to know that you're going to come out and you're not going to be burned. It might get a little hot, but you're going to come out and you're not going to be burned. Some of you are suffering in silence. Like you don't say nothing to anybody about it, but you're suffering on the inside. Whether it be like mental health, emotional health, where you're just suffering and you're depressed, or some of you have these things that have happened in the past or things that are happening right now, and then you haven't told anybody, and so you're just kind of suffering on the inside, and God hasn't left you. And so before I go any further, I want you to know that God hasn't left you, right? And you're still here. She's still here. So I say that to say is I don't want you to be concerned with your present circumstances. Now that's really easy to say. It's really easy to say, don't be concerned with it, but you ain't walking through it. You don't know what it's like to walk through this in my situation right now, and you know what, I may not. But I know one thing, is that you can't allow your circumstances to dictate your obedience to God.
Amen. Yes.
Because I know if at one point, if God was telling her to sing and she didn't sing, there's a whole lot of folk in here going to be robbed out of a blessing. And I don't say that to put pressure on her, but you have to be obedient to God. There's been some times where God is flat, hey, you're not singing this week. I need you to rest. Because what good are you if you're not healthy? Right? Amen. And so that's important too. Like resting peace is important. That was why Jesus would depart sometimes. And you know what? Some people were next in line. I can imagine how angry they might have been if they were hoping to get prayed for, hoping to get healed, and Jesus went. But sometimes you got to recharge. Sometimes you may not have an ailment, but you just need to recharge because you're shattered, right? But anyways, I don't know who I'm talking to, but sometimes we allow our circumstances to cloud our vision, and we allow those things that we're walking through to cause us to forget that we are children of God. Some of y'all missed your amen moment right there, and that's okay. And again, I don't know who I'm talking to today, but I feel like there's some of us in that place where God has put some things on your heart, and He's been telling you to do this, or give that, or to say that, or to pray that, and some of us, our responses are, they're like, oh, well, God, I can't do that because, I haven't been healed yet. I haven't been blessed yet. I haven't gotten that blessing that I've been praying for. And, I haven't been given much yet. So because I haven't been blessed, because I haven't been healed, because I haven't been given much yet, I can't really do that because, you're just not hooking me up with what I need. Like, listen, I know it would be good for some of you to get your healing. I know it would be good for some of you to get your blessing first. But it would be a whole lot better to God if you did it regardless of what you're dealing with. If you walk in obedience regardless of what you're walking through. If you walk in obedience regardless of the arrows that are flying your way. Regardless of the people who are stabbing you in the back and are slandering you in the back, or the people that are stabbing you in the front, and you went to give them a hug and they stabbed you. Like, because some people are stone cold. Those frenemies, I mentioned that term before, they're frenemies. They act like they're friends, but they want to see you fall because they're really an enemy to you. They look at you as an enemy, not as somebody that they should be lifting up, but as somebody that they want to fall. How much better would it be to God if we did obedience? If we just did obedience in itself, regardless of what we're dealing with, regardless of our circumstances. Like, it's good for you to give when you're rich, but how much greater is it when the poor decide to give out of what they have to? Because that's obedience. It's not just obedience when you have a lot, it's obedience in general. When you give, when God calls you to give. And some of us be like, shoot, we're talking about money at this week, I'll just say that one. I really wanted to tithe this week, but I got that bill coming up. Instead of trusting that God can make a way, we just take what's His and use it for our gain. I don't want my phone to get cut off. I really need to watch my direct TV. I really got to make sure I got internet so I don't go crazy at night when I could be spending time with my family, but instead of spending time on my phone. Guilty for that piece, because there's a lot of time. Tad and I even had a discussion today, like, we need to make more family time. We let Bella and Manny just play outside until they're shattered, and then they come in, and then they're getting ready for bed. And we could give more time to that. But anyways, think about it. We only give when we have. And really, our giving in that piece, this sermon's not about that, but I'm just going to go there because the Holy Spirit pushed me there. Our giving kind of reflects our heart. Like, money has this way of exposing who you really are. Money has a way of exposing. So if you're generous and God gives you more, you know what you're going to do? You're going to give more. And if you're stingy and God gives you more, you're going to keep more. And it's all about you. Like, what would happen, on the flip, what would happen when the sick would decide to start praying for people to get healed, even though they didn't get their healing yet? What would happen if the people who feel like they're in lack would pray for blessing over other people, even though they didn't get the blessing that they thought was coming their way? How much greater would it be that if we were distraught and depressed, that we would still start to proclaim the goodness and greatness of God, even though we didn't always feel it? Again, I'm not doubting that you have an issue or that your circumstances in your life this morning aren't brutal. I'm not doubting you, but I want you to know that your circumstance shouldn't stop you from giving all the praise and all of the glory and all of the honor to God. And that's exactly what I was talking about last week, which segued us into where we are today. Like, it's easier for us to step out on faith when everything is good. It's super easy to step out on faith when we can see the path laid out for us. And so many of us in this room, us included, we said, you know what, God, I just need you to give me a sign. No matter what, God, I need you to give me every single sign possible so I can muster up the courage to do what you said to do. Like, I'm not going to walk unless you drag my foot in front of me and make it move. And that's what some of us are doing. But it takes a special kind of man. It takes a special kind of woman to say, even though I'm walking through it, I'm going to serve the one and true living God. I'm going to serve the Alpha and Omega. I'm going to serve the beginning and the end. I'm going to serve the King of Kings. I'm going to serve the Lord of Lords. He speaks and the earth exists. He says, let there be light, and there was light. I'm going to serve that God. Amen. And when we walk in that place, then you're going to see what God has for you. But if you continue to walk in the place, because I don't have, I'm not going to do, and that could be anything. I don't have this gift. I don't have this blessing. I don't have those finances. I don't have those connections. Whatever it is, we could be acting in that place, and God is going to ask us to do something, and we're just going to flat out reject it. As if God didn't know what you were walking through. As if God didn't plan that out by planning it out. It wasn't happenstance that God said, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to walk in this. I need you to go there. I need you to say this. I need you to pray this. Hey, I know that part right there where you don't want to worship. That's where I need you to worship right now. Like, even if you have nothing left, if you're like Job and you have nothing left, you still got Jesus. Amen. Has he not been enough? Yeah. Like, some of us want everything on a silver platter and everything done for us. We want God to enable us. You think God's going to enable you? No. And there's going to be a lot of times where you're hoping to be enabled, and he's going to start pulling strings back. So, no, I got to show you that this is not going to be the way that you're going to operate. That's not going to be healthy for you. That's not going to be healthy for your family. It's not going to be healthy for your friends. Like, it doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter what kind of degrees you have. It doesn't matter what you have in your bank account. It doesn't matter how much you know, how smart you deem yourself to be. If you have Jesus in this place, you should fear nobody or no thing. You should be scared of nobody or no thing. There is no army greater than the army that we're on. There is no boss greater than the boss that we serve. His name is Jesus. Again, right there in itself, after all of that being said, y'all still miss your shouting moment. Maybe we were asleep last week when we talked about worship and give him everything that we have. Again, I'm not saying that there ain't no giants, because Goliath is a giant. And I'm not saying there's no Goliath in your life, because some of us have multiple. But what I'm saying that there's no Goliath, there's no giant bigger than our God. Amen. Which brings me to my first point. And it's a question. How big is your God? Huge. How big is your God? Huge. But for real, like, how big is your God? Because so many of us, we go into that place and we operate as if our God can't do nothing. Like, sometimes God is going to ask you to do some things that you don't fully understand, and maybe, just maybe, he's trying to show off his glory inside of you. Like, maybe God is asking you to do something that would seem impossible, knowing that God delighteth in the things that seemeth impossible to man anyways, and he's just trying to show off his glory. He's just trying to show off his goodness. He's just trying to show off his power. See, again, when everything's Gucci, and when everything's gravy, and everything's good, and everything's going well, and when you're in a certain position, it all seems to make sense. But what happens when the underdog in the story? What happens when you have nothing to lose and you say, you know what, God, if you are before me, then what can stand against me? Yep. But that's uncomfortable. And we live in a world that worships comfort. Listen, you go through the drive-thru, and if you ain't through the drive-thru in like 3.5 minutes, that's 3 minutes and 30 seconds for all you math folks. If you're not, you're about to flip the script. It's supposed to be fast food. What? How long would it take you to make that at the house? And you're crying because they didn't cut the time down 90%, that it wasn't done like that. But puts that up in the back, like, yep, that's me. How about, it's one thing to speak a sermon, right? It's really, you can say it's really easy if you have a gift of speaking or you're just courageous. But it's one thing to speak out a sermon, right? But it's another to live one out. And God is calling each one of us to live a sermon out. Each one of us ought to want to live our lives in a way better than we can with our mouth. Talk is cheap. It's cheap. What good is it if you don't mean it when you say it, right? And so in light of that, we all in this room, myself included, ought to be in a place where I want my actions to display God's goodness, and I want my actions to display His glory, not glory. That wouldn't be cute. That would be really Halloweenish, which my son would be happy about because he loves Halloween. But we want our actions to display God's goodness and God's glory. That's what we should want. But oftentimes, we want Him to show His goodness in our circumstances so we can receive all the glory, so we can put it on our social media accounts, so we can tell everybody how everything is great in this season that we're in. And that's why anybody reads this story of David and Goliath, that it preaches well when we talk about David. But that's what last week I told you, I'm not like David, the focus is there, but today the focus is not on David. The focus is on the other people in the story. The focus is on all of us in this room right now. God's people. These Israelites, they stood out there and got punked out for 40 straight days. Goliath came out twice a day. That's 80 times again for you people who aren't good at math. And God's people were literally punked by Goliath over and over and over and over. They were soft. They were sweet. They were mushy. They were sorry. If I'm picking an army, I'm not picking people like that. Right? But 80 times over the course of 40 days. How long does it take you after you hear something to actually do something about it? And some of these cats for 40 days, and by some I mean all of them, did absolutely nothing. It's one thing to get annoyed or to get verbally aggressive or write a blog or post on Facebook or tweet or post something in our Snapchat or Instagram or put it in an email or I just like to call some people Facebook gangsters. They're really tough. They can post all these crazy things on Facebook, but if you ever saw that person in person, they're like they never said anything because they ain't got in them, right? They were the Israelite army. But it's another thing to actually stand in the face of a giant. To stand in the face of the giant that you're facing and say, "Get thee behind me, you have no power over me, because I belong to the one and only true God." I know you seem big, but my God is bigger. You may seem great, but my God is greater. You big and bad, you're huge. And you've been hitting that speech money 80 times over the last 40 days. But my God is bigger and better. Amen. But the Israelite army for 40 days, they just took it. Man, they just took it. And after you hear something enough, we start to believe it. If you have somebody like us as a child, if you have somebody speaking death over you, you suck. You're no good. You're never going to amount to anything. After you hear it a certain amount of times, you start to believe it. Oh, you're stupid. I can't believe you didn't figure that out. You start to believe some of these things. And they started to believe what Goliath had to say, that they could do nothing. The first or second day, some of them it might have been hard to stomach. But because they weren't walking in a place of courage, that they were walking in a place of fear, then what began to happen? They started to believe the very words that Goliath was saying. Some of us, we talk a really good game. We do. Some people got the wordplay together. But you can't complain about what you're willing to tolerate. And that's my second point. Right? If we're gonna face the Goliaths in our life, if we're gonna walk in a place of courage, if we're gonna walk in a place of power and not fear, then we can't complain about the things that we're willing to tolerate. Legit, if I'm talking to Israel, I'm yo, you stood there twice, you stood there and he bashed you twice a day for 40 days. I heard the yelling, I heard the disrespect and the curses towards your God, the one that's going to give you eternal heaven, the one that grants you access into heaven, the one that gives you a word. And how long are you going to tolerate it before you actually step up?
Jesus.
They tolerated it for 40 days and did nothing.
Shame on them.
Some of us have been tolerated in our whole lives and we still do nothing. At what point are you going to depend on God to help you be strong and courageous, like it says in Joshua, and go ahead and do the thing that He's called you to do? Enough pushing God's orders to the side. It's time to start walking about it. Like at this point, I imagine Goliath's thoughts. I imagine, man, he felt he was the man at this point. Like he stood up in front of all these people and he said what he needed to say about how he felt that their God wasn't anything. And, all the things that I heard about your God, and he doesn't really match up based off of what you guys are doing. You're just standing here with your shiny armor, but you ain't willing to get your swords dirty. You ain't willing to go to war, but you signed up knowing that you signed up for war. Like, at this point, he thought he was a boss. Like, he thought he was untouchable. And maybe, just maybe, if somebody stepped up the very first time he gave his speech, that maybe Goliath would have been intimidated. What if one of the Israelites, it should have been David, what if one of those men in the army would have stood up to David, being double their size and more? What if they would have stood up? I said, nah, man, that's twisted, because the God that I serve, no, I don't care that you're big, because my God is big. What if one of them would have said it right at the gates? He would have been intimidated, but instead, the army took it. And by day 30, by day 40, it was really predictable to Goliath and what was going to happen. He knew exactly what his day was going to look like. He was going to eat his big old breakfast. He was going to chill for a while. He would get his gear on, take a sweet old time. He would go make fun of some Israelites, strike a pose, whatever his flex was in front of them, knowing that nobody's going to do anything. He would go back, take a nap because he ate really good, right? And then because he wore himself out with that big old speech that he was spitting at the Israelite army because they were a bunch of cowards and he let them know it. And then after his big old speech, he would wake back up again after his nap, and he would go back out a second time, and he would repeat what he did the first time. He didn't need any notes. At this point, he knew exactly what he was going to say. And by day 40, he probably had an abbreviated version. Like by day 40, it probably got to a point where it's like, I'm big, you're little, I'm tough, you're soft, I'm going to stand up here, and you're going to punk out. Have a good day, I'll talk to you in the afternoon. And he probably walked away, but with probably more profanity, because I imagine since he wasn't a man of God, he probably wasn't a man of not use of choice words. So, like he had to memorize it. Pause, rewind, play, and then repeat the process. Like he knew that he could come out twice a day because there wasn't nobody going to do anything. Nobody was going to do anything. And I'm so tired when Christians just listen to the words of the enemy so much that they can repeat exactly what the enemy's got to say. But they can't quote anything that God is telling them to do. They can't quote any of those promises that God has in the word for them. That we can quote what the enemy is saying that we've been tolerating for so long, but we can't quote nothing that God says for us to do.
Wow.
Because we're walking in fear. Man, your God ain't great. He ain't a God of love. He's a God filled with hate. Because if he was a God filled with love, why would he not be accepting everybody? If he was a God filled with love, why are people starving to death all over the world? If he was a God of love, why is sex trafficking still happening? Why isn't he ending prostitution? Why is he ending of these? Why did that happen to you as a kid? If God was so loving, why would that happen? And these are the words that the enemy says, and we begin to believe it.
Yes.
We begin to believe that every bad thing happened to us is because our God isn't good. As if God didn't give us free will to be. Like, what would happen if God's people actually stood up? What would Goliath have done? What if God's people actually stood up to all these things that we say that are bad? What if God's people actually stood up to all of it? Like the Israelites came out every single day in full armor, knowing very well that they weren't going to do jack. That they weren't going to do anything about it. They were probably hoping, I sure hope that Goliath changes his mind and we can just fight the little guys. Guaranteed some. And some of them were probably in the front line, and they're like this every day. I roll back. Day 30 happens, they're back here. Day 40, they're here. And some of them didn't even make, some of them were back here on like day 2, hiding behind the candlestick, hoping that nobody would see them. Hoping that Goliath wouldn't call them out from the back. And so many of us were scared. They didn't even have to clean their swords. They didn't have to clean their armor. Guaranteed their boots weren't even getting dirty unless they got a lot of rain that day. They would night's over and they would go and all the army, they would go hang their armor up and put it on display because that might have been their idol. And then the next day they would put it on. Which leads me to my next point. Like, don't put on your armor if you're not willing to fight. Don't put on your armor if you're not willing to fight. Like, what was the point of filling out the application knowing very well that you had zero intention of fulfilling the job description?
Jesus.
What was the point? Like, what's the point of signing up knowing that you're just going to take up somebody else's spot who is more worthy, who is more deserving, who is going to walk in courage, who wasn't going to be pumped out because they knew that their God was bigger than any circumstance at all? I wish there was just somebody who would stand up and say, you know what, God, if you can use anybody, you can use me. I don't have much, but I'll do whatever you want me to do. I don't know much, but I know I got you. I may not have the biggest words, I may not have the greatest vocabulary, but I know one thing. I know the name of Jesus. I know that when I speak the name, that demons have to flee. I know that when I speak to the name, people have to be healed. I know that when I shout the name, that no Goliath and no giant can stand up to it. Because he is our Lord and he is our God, and he's not going to be moved, he's not going to be swayed, he's not going to be intimidated, he's not going to be shaken. But why do some of us allow ourselves to walk into a place where we're swayed, where we're moved, where we're shaken, and when we're intimidated, knowing that our God is bigger than any Goliath we face? Like, listen, Goliaths, like real talk, God allows Goliaths to be present. No, for real talk, he allows Goliaths to be present. Why? So that the people of God would actually do what God is calling them to do. He allows Goliath to be present because he is calling God's people, he's calling God's army to do so much more. So he can receive all of the glory. So he can receive all of the honor. So he can receive all of the praise. So we would stand up and stop calling ourselves the underdogs, because we were never meant to be the underdogs. He's called us to be victors.
Amen.
To walk in victory. We'll sing songs that talk about we have the victory in the name of Jesus, but our lifestyle choices, our walk doesn't reflect that we have victory. Some of our walks reflect that we've already lost. Like, our issue is that we stay so focused on Goliath. We stay so focused on the giant. We stay so focused on the circumstance that's in front of us. And the longer that we do that we focus on those things that are in front of us, the more that it actually begins to seem like a battle. And it will seem as such until we are defeated. Because we walked into it with the idea that defeat was an option. The problem is some of us got our eyes on the wrong one.
Yes.
Some of us got our eyes on the wrong one. As long as we keep our eyes on Goliath, as long as we keep our eyes on the giant, as long as we keep our eyes on the circumstance that's in front of us, we are going to be defeated. But when we take our eyes off of that thing, off of him, and we put our eyes on Jesus, we're going to realize how small that giant really is. And maybe this is why, just maybe this is why the Bible tells us to put Jesus on, right?
Amen.
To keep our eyes on Jesus. To look to where our help comes from. To look where our protection comes from. To keep our eyes focused on Jesus. To be aware more, like some of us are more aware of the problem, but we don't ever put our eyes on the solution, and his name is Jesus.
Yeah.
Like some of us in this room, God has been calling us to step out. And I know God has been calling some of you to step out. And even some people who aren't in this room, it could be somebody who's in kids' church. It could be somebody who didn't show up today. It could have been Peggy who's sick today. It could have been somebody who was traveling. Like it could have been many people, right? That God has been calling to step out in faith, to do something that God told you to start a long time ago. But what you did is you started to believe the speeches that the enemy's been giving you. We were believing the speeches that the enemy was giving. We tell ourselves that we don't have much, we can't do much, we're not equipped. And what happens is we start to believe those things and forget what we do have. And this is exactly what those soldiers did. They were feeling just that way. They had their sword, their shield, their helmet, their shin guards, their belt. Like they had everything. Like the things that we talk about as the full armor of God, like they were wearing their actual armor, and they were an army of God. And they had everything they needed. They had God behind them, alongside of them, and in front of them. And they had all the equipment that they needed. They were children of God and they punked out. And so then we have this young little teenage boy. He steps out. He wasn't enlisted in the army. He wasn't ready for the army yet. But I'm telling you, he was more of a soldier than any one of those Israelite army men.
Yes.
He had no armor. He had a slingshot. He went and picked up some stones from the brook. And he defeats Goliath. Like, it makes a really good story, right? It makes a really good story that the underdog steps up. But like I said before, the fact of the matter is that David should have never had to fight that fight. David should have never had to go out there in battle. That wasn't David's victory. It should have been someone else. There were some other men out there who've been serving in the army and they've won lots of battles. And they've conquered lots of people. They've been victorious. There were some men out there who deserved to take down Goliath. God had set it up in such a way that they were supposed to. And they allowed somebody else to do what God had called them to do. How many victories in this room right now, how many victories in this room have we missed out on because we weren't willing to do what God called us to do, so therefore we allowed somebody else to do the job that we were supposed to do? The job that God had called us to do. Like, I'm not saying the best it's not in front of you. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the best isn't in front of you. But I'm saying there's some great things that have passed you by. Let me reword that. There's some great things that you allowed pass you by.
Yes. Yes.
There were some things that
Absolutely.
you just let go of. Some, like we talked, like the anniversary service, we talked about some of those things. Some of those things that we gave away, sold, threw away, tossed, handed out. There were some things that we let go.
Yes.
And every one of these men in that army had an opportunity to do something that God was calling them to do. And they just let those things go. There were some great opportunities that some of us should have taken care of in the past. You know, that one time that God told you to, go pray for that person, to go sing, to go use your gifting, to give that amount of finances to that ministry or to bless, I don't know what it is. God could have called you to start a business. I have no idea what God has called you to do with your funds. But we allowed the giant in front of us to come down in front of us and block out the name of Jesus. Like, we allowed the Goliath to stop us. Like that person that God told you to go pray for healing. You know, that moment that Jesus would have been glorified, but you didn't do it because you weren't believing that God could heal that person through the prayers of the righteous. Like that time that he told you to step out of your career because he called you to be a pastor and he called you to preach the Bible. And maybe he didn't just call you to plant one church. Maybe he called you to plant many churches. And all you did was make excuses.
Yes.
8 years of excuses.
Yes.
I can't preach, or I don't have any notes. I don't know the first thing about preaching. Man, I don't even have anything together. I don't even know my Bible like that. Like some of us, we missed a fantastic opportunity to walk in what God has called us to do, but we're operating in a place of fear. Like, you have more in you than you realize. I have more in me than I realize. Like, some of you have sermons on the inside of you just waiting to explode out. Some of you have songs on the inside of you that you have yet to write, that you have yet to sing. Or maybe it was a song that somebody else wrote, but when you were to sing it, it was going to bless somebody. Some of you have healing on the inside of you, that the Holy Spirit has given you this gift of healing.
Jesus.
Like, God is never going to call you to do something that He's not equipping you for, and He's not going to call you to do something that He didn't intend to bring you through. But some of us, we just get stuck. We get debilitated. We get halted by the enemy because of their words. And what I want to know is who in this place is ready to go conquer their Goliath. I don't know what it is. Like, some of us have been facing that Goliath for a long, 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 long time. And the longer that you sit there and allow that Goliath to punk you, the bigger he's going to grow, and the smaller you make your God to be. You don't need some extravagant plan. You don't have to have your whole entire life together. Faith in Christ is all that we need. Like, the weapons that you're holding right now, the weapons in your faith in Christ is stronger than anything that the enemy has in his hands. Because the enemy's got a bunch of bootleg and artificial things that aren't the real deal, and some of us gravitate towards those things. But you need to know that if you got Jesus, you have more than enough. If you have Jesus, you have more than enough. And that's my final point today. If you have Jesus, you have more than enough.
Amen.
But some of us, we've looked at Jesus and said he wasn't enough. You've never been enough, God, because you didn't give me didn't get healed when I wanted to. My dad didn't get healed when I wanted to. My mom didn't get healed. That person, you didn't heal their broken heart. When my grandma passed away, you weren't. Like, I can't tell you how many circumstantial faith people that I've met in my life that they stopped serving God or believing in God because God didn't bless them the way that they wanted to be blessed. We said a couple weeks ago, God ain't Aladdin. He ain't the genie. You can't just rub that and hope that your wish is going to come through. That's not how God gets down. Like these Israelites, they literally stood there watching and listened to Goliath give his speeches, and they didn't do one thing that they were supposed to do. David is great, but there should have been some Daniels. David is great, but there should have been some other Josephs, some Benaiahs. There should have been somebody else in that army that should have spoken out, that should have stood up courageously, walking in the courage that God has called them to walk in. And that's where I have an issue. I have an issue in hearing that other heroes that God had been calling to be heroes were zeros. I have an issue with the fact that people of God aren't walking in the courage of God, in the strength of God. They're not walking in their faith of God. They're not trusting in God. They're not believing in God. And I believe that today in this room, even right now, that we got some undercover heroes in here. And God has been calling you to do something, to step out, and your response is always this nervous response, and you're like, I'm scared. And listen, there's nothing wrong with being nervous. And there's nothing wrong with being scared. Like, we all get scared. I don't care who you are. I don't care what neighborhood you grew up in. Every one of us has that place of fear. Every one of us has that place where we get scared. And there's nothing wrong with a scared response. There is nothing wrong with a scared response as long as that scared response isn't you being faithful to God. If your scared response is hindering your obedience to God, then I would question how much you believe in the God that you serve. It's okay to be afraid, as long as your fearfulness doesn't affect your faithfulness. Amen. And we need to be in that place. You ain't got to be arrogant about it. You ain't got to be self-righteous. You ain't got to be all holy. You just got to do it because you know that everything that you need lies in Jesus.
That's right.
That everything that you need to be equipped with lies in God. Like, you're his child. You are his son. You are his daughter. The issue isn't in the knowing, it's in the going. The issue isn't in the knowing, it's in the going.
Thank you, Jesus.
And the reason that some of us are so stressed out, it isn't because we don't know what we are called to do. We know exactly what we're called to do, we just don't do what we're called to do, and that's why we're so stressed. That's why we have so much guilt, because we're not doing what God is calling us to do. Again, it's okay to give God a scared response as long as that scared response is saying, I can do it. And God is like, man, if I could just get one more person, if I could just get one more church, if I could get 2 more people, if I could get 2 more churches in the city who would just go out there, maybe even 3 more people, or maybe even 3 more churches who are going to be willing to go and step out and say, listen, Lord, you can use me for whatever you want. You can send me wherever you want to go, whenever, wherever you want me to go. I'm about that life. I'm ready to serve you. I'm ready to flip this city upside down. It's not about what you have in your hands. It's about what you know in your heart. And what you know in your heart, and it wasn't the sword that took down Goliath. The sword was just the end thing. The thing that took down Goliath was the rock.
That's right.
And his name is Jesus.
Yep.
That's it. He is the rock of ages. And when we stand upon that rock, there is no giant, there is no devil, there is no demon in hell that can match up with the forces of God. So where's God telling you to go? What's he telling you to do? What giants are you supposed to be taking down that you've been allowing to pump you up for a long, long time? Like, God's got you in the race, and he's been like, he's shot you ready, bang! And some of us just stood there. And some of us are just standing there still. That the race has started and we're still standing. You have to be willing to go. And if you just say yes and run in obedience the race that God has called you to run, I can tell you one thing, your story is going to be told a whole lot different than those Israelite army.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers any of their names, and we don't do anything to have anybody remember our names, but their story should have been told a whole lot different. Where is God calling you to go? Maybe God's calling you to be a missionary. Maybe God's asking you to be more involved here. Maybe God is asking you to go plant a church. Or maybe God is asking you to go join another church who's planting churches right now because you feel like God is equipping you and you feel that you're ready. Just ask the Father about it, talk to him about it. And if God is telling you to do it, then you do it. If God is telling you to sing, then why aren't you up here singing yet? If God is telling you to fund something, why aren't you using your funding for his glory of God? If God is calling you to take the next step in a relationship, why aren't you put a ring on it yet? If God is calling you to take the next steps in a relationship, why aren't you stood up at the altar and said, I do? You've got pastors and people who are willing to do that, who are willing to counsel you, who are willing to walk you through some things. Maybe God's calling you to quit a job. Why are you still working there then? God isn't going to tell you to do something He's not going to provide. He's totally going to provide you to do it. So what is He calling you to do? He's got you at the starting line. He's got me at the starting line. And the only conversation that we need to be having with God is, I'll go. And He's saying go, and the conversation that we're having with God is, no, not now. But if God has already told you a yes, if you get a yes from heaven, even hell can't say no. And if you get a go from God, even Satan can't say no. So why are we still chilling at that line and not moving forward? You're not supposed to respond to God with a no. You're supposed to respond to God with a, I'll go. I don't know nothing about it, but I'll go. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll go. God is saying go, 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 and our response is no, no, no. I ain't got it together. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified enough. I don't know. Can't you just send somebody else? You got a lot of other people you can send. Can't you just send somebody else? And what I'm telling you is if you just do it, there's a whole lot of doubters who are going to become believers because of you. There's a whole lot of haters that God is going to turn into praisers through your life because you said, I'll go, instead of no. There's a whole lot of angry folk who are going to start to feel the joy of Christ through your life because you said, I'll go. Like there's somebody who's going to get saved because of your obedience to God. There's somebody who's going to get saved because of your praise to God. There's somebody who's going to get saved because of your prayers to God. And what you didn't realize that somebody was going to get their answer to prayer, somebody was going to get their blessing, somebody was going to get that miracle, and it was hinging on your obedience. That you were going to rob somebody of their blessing because you were holding back when God was telling you to move forward. Like, I can't, listen, for real, I can't tell you how many people pray this prayer to themselves. They pray this prayer, they're like, man, I just wish somebody would invite me to church. I want to get involved in a church, but I just don't know where to go. And I wish that somebody would just invite me to church. I wish somebody would be about engaging the culture for the glory of God. I wish that somebody would be willing to cross over from one area to other, regardless of what our economic status, my socioeconomic status, regardless of what our skin looks like, regardless of what our sin looks like. I wish that somebody would just cross over. I wish that somebody would just invite me to church. And when we didn't invite that person that God was telling us to invite, we put them in a position to miss out on their greatest miracle that they could ever experience in salvation of Jesus Christ. David was great. But there should have been a whole lot more people who were willing to step out and operate in the will of God. Like there's a difference between saying that you're on God's side and knowing that you're on God's side. There's a huge difference. Just like there's a difference in being somebody who plays basketball and being a basketball player. Huge difference. There's a great difference in knowing that Jesus saves instead of just saying Jesus saves. Just like there's a big difference between David and the Israelite army. David knew exactly who he was, whereas the others, they just spoke about it. They signed up for it as if they knew, because it was a heart thing. It was a worship thing. See, when you know it, when you got it all figured out, you don't complain about your circumstances because you know that God is going to work together all things for the glory of God. That God is going to work together all things for the glory of those who love Him and called according to His purpose. That even though I'm going through it, I know I'm going to come out of it. Why? Because I know that God has called me. I know that God has sent me. I know that God has qualified me. And some of us are just having too many conversations with the enemy. Some of us are in a position where we can repeat what the enemy says, but we can't repeat anything that God says. Maybe you're in this room today because you've never allowed yourself to call God your Father. Maybe some of you have never called God your Father because you allowed Goliath to punk you all these years. Maybe some of us in this room have never said, Jesus, yes, I'll go. Or Jesus, I know that you are what my soul is longing for. You've been calling me out for a long time, and I've just been stiff-arming you. God is calling you today.